It's beautiful to be here today with Petra, who has been a dear friend of mine since long time. And today I want to have a conversation with her. I'm very curious to hear more about what she's been up to in the last few weeks. And I want you also, dear listeners, to learn more about Petra and her work. So we will dive. Thank you again, Petra, so much for being today here with us. And yeah, I would love starting asking you to share a little bit more with us about you and about your work.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Thanks for making the time and giving me this opportunity to chat with you and to share with other people about the work I do and some of the threads of the work that I know also touch on your work and on, I guess, our long-standing history of both engaging with movement and the body and our love for the kind of healing and the kind of change that comes through working with the body. This is how we first met, right? In all the way back in 2009, which is a long time ago. And maybe it's good to actually talk about this specific place where we met, the specific workshop, because it's very much related to the work I do. So Laura and I met on a movement medicine workshop that was called Dancing with the Heart of the World with our teacher, Yakov Darling Khan. And the reason I mention this is because that particular workshop is not just movement medicine, as in we didn't just dance, but we also really connected our dancing inquiry to this question of how do we bring change, not just to ourselves, but also to this bigger picture of the many challenges and the many crises that we're facing in the world. The environmental challenges, the social justice challenges, the crisis around what matters, who we are, how are we to live now, knowing that there's so much at stake in the world. So I want to just bring that in because it kind of feels quite, I hadn't thought about this before, but it feels so relevant to the work that I do, that this combination of working with the body, working with our own healing, but not separate from the issues that are in the world. So this connection between the personal and the collective, between our own healing and the change or the healing of the things that are happening on the earth, in our communities, in our relationship with the natural world. I don't know if you want to add something to that, because I'm sure you also have a particular memory of that.
Well, it has been such a long time ago, but actually I do remember the moment we did sit together, I think in a little group, and we drew something. I don't remember exactly what was the invitation in that very moment, but I do remember very well when we met, and we've been walking together ever since, basically also through our training with movement medicine. And what I remember about that piece of work, that was also connected to the offering of the Pachamama Alliance, because the School of Movement Medicine at that time was becoming closer to the work of the Pachamama Alliance. And I'm curious to hear actually more about this passion of yours, because as far as I remember, you have been so full of life every time that we had conversations about it, and every time that you grew even more strongly in your work and in your offering, bringing in this thread of relating to the wider web of life, our non-human relatives. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about that, and how that relationships, how this love for the world really informs your work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess when you're speaking and when you're asking me about that, what comes to my mind is that when I was a little girl already, I mean, my first love really was the natural world around me, the little animals, the insects. I used to spend a lot of time, watching and engaging with snails and beetles and butterflies and caterpillars, and also our own pets, our cats. And I loved horses. I kind of loved all animals, and I spent a lot of time engaging with them. And there was a point, I don't know how old I was, I just have this kind of picture memory of this point where I still thought, oh, the world and the challenges in the world and the things that we do to the natural world, the things that we do to the animals that are problems could be changed if only people knew that this was what was happening. So I had this idea that knowledge would create change. So, oh, people don't know that we do these terrible things to nature and to the animals. So if they knew, then they would change. That was sort of my thinking at the time as a little girl. And then obviously as I got older, I realized it wasn't a lack of information. It wasn't a lack of this knowing here that kept us doing things that are creating this crisis on the planet. So then I was quite puzzled, like, what is it that actually creates change? If knowing about things doesn't equal change, what is it that's needed? And that's kind of been my inquiry throughout my life, in this relationship between humanity and the non-human beings, but also increasingly then in terms of our own inner changes. So as we've discussed, we've both been on this movement medicine journey, which is also concerned with our own healing, with our own unpacking of the things that drive us, with the patterns that maybe don't serve us anymore, with the trauma healing that is needed for most of us. And so for me, there's these parallels between this question of, like, how do we change the big picture, the many challenges, which is what concerned me for a lot of my life more. I was more kind of oriented towards, what do we need to do to change this? And so it was like knowledge, or do we need to take more action? Do we need to be out there fighting? And then increasingly through my own personal journey, realizing, okay, but there is another component to that that's equally, if not more important, which is how do we understand ourselves and understand what drives us? What are the stories? What are the patterns that are not just our own patterns, that are the patterns that we've inherited from our ancestors, from our families, but also from our culture and from this capitalist culture that we live in? What are the stories about what matters? What are the stories about who we are and what we should do and how we should live and what we should aspire to, that shape us in a way that create these problems, that create the problems in the world, the climate crisis, the social injustice, the many forms of biodiversity loss and so on, but that also actually at the same time create that feeling of disconnection, that feeling of despair and loneliness and dissatisfaction and depression and all these other things that many of us probably recognize that we struggle with, where we might think, oh, there's something wrong with me because I'm not feeling happy, I'm not feeling fulfilled, I feel stuck, I feel overwhelmed, that those things are caused by the same dynamics that the challenges in the outer world are being created by. So, in a way, for me, that's kind of the central inquiry in all of my work. It's like, how do we create positive change for ourselves, but in relationship to the positive change that we want to see in the world? It's not one or the other. We can't find healing here without there also being a sort of greater healing or greater change in terms of our relationship with each other, a relationship with the non-human world. And we can't create a better world out there if we don't also address how the dynamics of what's at stake out there live in ourselves. I don't know if that's clear. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
As you can see, I'm quite passionate about it because that's been with me for so long, this thing of like, what really helps us change? What really makes a difference? And how do we do that in a way that doesn't keep replicating the same things that we already have, the same stories, the same patterns, the same dynamics? How do we not go like, oh, we're doing something new, but in fact we're just using the same dynamics that the old systems were driven by?
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask you so many things. Thank you for sharing that. I feel actually energized by hearing you, because we shared a little bit before starting this conversation that I was a little bit sleepy and a little bit tired, and I'm feeling a little bit like more awake, really, just by listening to your words and their vibration and how alive they are. And I really would like to ask you, in relationship to what you shared and in relationship to the madness of the times that we live in, and what is it that makes a difference? And I know maybe a little bit of that answer because I know you, but I would love people to hear that from you. What is it that makes a difference actually for you in your daily life, not only as a teacher and as a practitioner, as a therapist? How do you manage to practice in your own life, especially in the really difficult moment? How do you manage to bridge these two worlds, the inner and the outer?
Yeah, such a good and big question, right? I think that's the question that we're all asking ourselves. I guess one of the most important lessons, and I think, it's a lesson that I have to learn again and again, is that I don't think life is ever going to be easy, or I don't think the outer world is ever going to be just perfectly fine, i.e., there's not going to be any challenges, no crises, or I'm going to be perfectly happy and there's not going to be any ups and downs. So this kind of shifting away from thinking I'm going to fix myself or I'm going to fix the world and then it's done and then it's just like plain sailing, to going, okay, life is always going to be like that. And it's probably going to be more and more like this, given where we find ourselves as humanity on planet Earth. And in my own life, I also know it's not like, there are periods of stability, there are periods of happiness. And then, of course, there will be other things that arise. The more ground we have, the more we discover how complex this being human is. So just this lesson that it's not really about stopping that or fixing ourselves so that we're going to be okay once and for all, but that it's a continuous going back to how do I create more ground for myself? How do I create more resourcing for myself, more capacity in myself so that I can meet these challenges differently? So it's for me, it's practice. It's not like I'm going to find a teacher or a practice or a tool that's going to fix me. It's about what practices and tools can I gather and have I gathered that allow me to keep coming back to ground, to keep coming back to some sense of there's something that guides me, something that inspires me to keep going, something that energizes me, something that makes me feel alive and that makes me feel a sense of possibility, a sense of hope, or a sense of purpose and meaning in my life. And for me, as you know, as I know for you as well, some of those practices, or most of those practices, are actually to do with the body. It's about coming back to the intelligence, the wisdom that lives in our own bodies, and the way our own bodies can show us how to find this ground, how to keep resourcing ourselves, not through a fix, but through understanding how this body, how this nervous system works, how our responses to the triggers work, so that we know, when this happens, it's not like there's something wrong with me, it's not like I need to be fixed, but this is some way to work with this particular issue, with this particular challenge, with this particular question, that keeps opening more possibility rather than closing them. And I guess when I'm talking about this, these practices to do with the body, I want to sort of say it's daily practices. Like, many people have some kind of meditation practice. For me, that's also my movement meditation practice, i.e. movement medicine. But then there's other things that may not feel like a practice. So, for example, most days I go out for a walk in a beautiful setting where I can connect to the sense of the elements, where I can connect to the plants, the trees, the other animals. And that for me is also an embodied practice. I mean, I'm walking, so there is something about movement that is inherently healing and energizing and calming. But there's also something about taking myself out of this little mind to open my eyes to the wonder of the world, to the beauty of the world, to the fact that I'm not here on my own in my little box of being human, but that there's all these other beings, the trees, the rocks, the soil, the birds, and to keep discovering that, to keep, I guess, to keep praying, because it's a prayer to kind of make connection with what's out there, and to remember that I am one part of all of that, so that I can lean into this sense of I'm belonging to something much, much bigger than the stories in my mind, and also to keep feeling into this matters to me so much. I want people to know how wonderful the world is. I want people to care that this continues for all the generations to come. So then also to feel into what's my role, or how do I find ways to ensure that there's a reciprocity, that I'm receiving so much from the world around me and from this connection with the other beings, and what is it that I can give back as well. I don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I keep going off into these bigger realms.
Really not right and not wrong. And
yeah, I think we were talking about practice. So what are the things that are helpful? Yeah, so embodied practices. I dance. When I meditate, I'm also meditating in a very embodied way through tuning into the sensations, tracking the sensations in my body, walking, swimming. At the moment, I've started swimming again in the very cold sea, and there's something so enlivening and something so beautiful about realizing that it's possible to do something that initially might feel like, oh, this is going to be so uncomfortable and so challenging, but then when you start doing it regularly, to realize, wow, it's really possible to adapt to this. And it's amazing to see how the body is able to do this, and to feel this aliveness in all the cells. Yeah.
Thank you. And what would you say, Petra, to somebody who perhaps is at the very beginning of this journey? Because I know from you that you have many years of practice behind, and many years of study, inquiry, training. And sometimes for some people, it can be a little overwhelming just to think about the body and what actually does it mean. For some other people, could be scary if they suffered any kind of abuse. So yeah, it may not feel safe for them to be in the body. So what would you say to somebody who is just putting, dipping their toes just for a taste? How could they start this adventure, this inquiry?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many ways to start, right? There's so many roads into this field. I guess on a day-to-day basis, I would just invite someone to notice a lot more what's happening in their body, because we mostly live up here in this head, and we walk through our lives and through the world thinking about things and never really noticing what's happening here. So even right now, I can feel my hands are slightly cold, but I can feel the chair under my bum. I can feel the heat in my belly. I can feel the connection with the ground under my feet. So simple things like the noticing is really important. That is in itself a way to train our attention, to train our mind, to train our nervous system into a different way of being, to keep noticing. And one can be very structured about this, and for example set a timer for 3 or 4 times a day for a minute, to just spend a minute feeling what's going on in the body. My belly is moving when I'm breathing, or there's a tightness in my chest, or wow, I've got so much energy in my hands. There's this tingling, there's this aliveness, there's this wanting to move. It's simple thing. It's without a story attached to what it means, simply noticing what's happening. And in a way, it's helpful to get out of the we're so often in the story of this means that, and this is the thing that's happening. But when we drop down to the level of the body and the felt sensation of the body, that in itself shifts things without us having to work it out up here. Just by feeling something, by tracking the sensation, we notice that the sensation doesn't stay the same. The sensation changes and becomes something else. So that's one way. I guess this is a very simple way that anyone can access on a daily basis. And then I would really encourage people to find a physical practice. You know, I mean, we can do a lot of physical things like sports, like running or whatever our thing is, and never actually be in the body.
Yeah.
Do things with the body without being in the body. So I would encourage people to find a practice, whether that's a movement practice like we have, the movement medicine practice, or whether it's Tai Chi or yoga, or even, I mean, one can walk very mindfully and really come into the body through that. There's so many possibilities. I mean, anything really can be done in a more embodied way, right? So, but something that really connects you to this physical body, that brings your attention into the body, can gradually really grow the capacity to tap into the wisdom of the body and to understand more about oneself. Yeah, I don't know if that's...
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that the listeners may have had a live embodied experience while you were talking. I certainly did, because while you were talking, I could feel more of the ground and the chair. And I was reminded also of how much this is a relational field. So through you talking, through your story and tone of the voice and everything, my body was organically shifting and my attention was dropping deeper. And I was reminded, because of this alive space between you and I, and actually this can happen because I know you very well. There is trust, there is intimacy, and yet I hope also that those who are listening may have had a little glimpse of that.
Yeah, and that's a really important point as well. So, you know, we can do a lot of these things on our own. I mean, so I have my practices that I do on my own at home, but there's something else that happens when we also have spaces where we connect with other people around a practice or around an activity, because as you say, we're kind of co-regulating our nervous systems. We need each other for this feedback of the bodies to find the ground under our feet together, to learn more about each other, because we're all mirrors and teachers of each other, to engage that safety system of our nervous system. So when we're engaged in a safe context with someone else, there's something that happens in our nervous system. I don't want to go into all the details, but there's something that happens that's incredibly resourcing and nourishing when we're here together, and we can feel, even across the screen, we can feel each other. We can feel what happens in our body when we're with someone who we love, or when we're with a pet that we are stroking. There's something incredibly nourishing and calming about that. And so, you know, apart from these two practices that I mentioned about tracking the sensations in the body and having a regular movement practice, there's also something about seeking out spaces where we can do those things with other people, because it amplifies the healing. And just like we can't change and heal ourselves without also engaging in the bigger picture, we can't do this without the relational dimension. You know, the relational dimension to other people and the relational dimension to the other beings of the planet, be they trees or pets or the air, the water, soil.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I'm aware also that some people who are listening, they may not know what is movement medicine. And I'm also aware, Petra, that throughout the years you trained in many different practices and modalities. I know that you are a lover also of poetry. So I would be curious to hear a little bit, for the listeners about these different strands and tapestry that you created in the years, and just to give us a little bit more a sense of the flavor of you and your work.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so as you mentioned, we both trained together in movement medicine, which is a very powerful body and movement based practice. You could also say it's a contemporary shamanic practice. It has a lot of different strands woven into it itself, different therapeutic approaches, constellations, gestalt therapy, and so on. But really the essence of it is that we come into our bodies, we move our bodies, and that allows us to understand ourselves better, that allows us to resource ourselves, to find the ground, and to make changes. I mean, on a very basic level, when we move, things change, because movement is change. So we shift the state that we're in, maybe the mood, but we can also use this in a much more I guess in a deeper, more nuanced way to make changes in our lives, because when we move and when we work with these inquiries that we have in movement medicine, some of the tools, some of the practices that go beyond just moving the body, but that are relational in the sense of bringing in the elements, for example, or understanding ourselves as a tree of life moving, or that direct our awareness to different things in ourselves and our environment, then we can also understand and change some of the dynamics, some of the habits that we're so used to that they just seem normal. They just seem to be the way things are, and we discover, oh, it's not actually true. This is not the way things are. This is just the lens, like a pair of glasses that we've seen this world and ourselves through, because at some point we were shaped in a particular way through our family, through our culture, through our experiences. And we can actually take those glasses off and choose something that works better for us, a different pair of glasses through which we can see the world in a way that serves us, rather than in a way that keeps us locked in a smallness, or in a particular pattern that keeps harming us, or that keeps interfering with the things that we want. So yeah, it's movement medicine is very simple and it's very complex at the same time. It has a lot of possibilities to understand who we are, what we're here to do, how to live a life that's more meaningful to ourselves and more full of aliveness. And by that I don't mean like just aliveness, like lots of energy, but more aliveness in the sense of more possibility to engage with ourselves and with the world, and more of a sense of meaning, purpose, belonging, a sense of this, what I described earlier, that I'm part of something much bigger than myself, and that can direct me, that can guide me, that can bring this meaningfulness to my life. So movement medicine, number one. Keep forgetting what the question was. Movement medicine. Then I've also, like you, Laura, engaged a lot in various somatic therapy approaches, trauma-informed approaches to the body, to movement, and various related things that are to do with the nervous system. So the polyvagal theory, and which is very popular right now. And this whole area of working somatically is very informed by our understanding of the nervous system, and how the nervous system takes us into these different states, and the signs that we can read in the body, the way our body shows us what's happening in our nervous system, and to inquire a little bit deeper into, what has shaped us. And then again, how we open that door to change through understanding our nervous system, through understanding that the things that we might be feeling or thinking or doing are not the truth, but are a particular reaction that's been shaped by our history. So I've done quite a lot of training around that, and I continue to do that because I find it fascinating to understand that it's such a different perspective on ourselves, on each other, and on our way of being in the world once one opens that door to looking at the body and the nervous system in that way. And then I've also engaged quite deeply with the work that reconnects, which is the body of Joanna Macy's life and work. which I guess again really is about this relationship between the world out there, the changes we're seeking, the changes we so desperately need in the world out there, and what is our own relationship with that? What is our own part in that? And that really a lot of that work so beautifully guides us through a process that in some ways is quite similar to some of the process in movement medicine, about coming here to ourselves, building resource, building ground, allowing ourselves to feel what we feel in response to the challenges in the world, whether that's grief or anger or helplessness or despair, to really allow ourselves to feel that, because we have such a fear of feeling. We feel like if I allow myself to really take in how terrible things are, I'm going to be overwhelmed. I'm never going to be able to do anything again. But what Joanna Macy discovered, and what she shares so beautifully, is that actually when we allow ourselves to feel these things, when we allow ourselves to express them with each other, there's something beautiful that happens. We have more intimacy with the other people that we share this with. We recognize that we're not the only ones feeling this. We have more intimacy and more aliveness in our relationship to everything else, because we really see how precious this world is. But also we don't feel so stuck and confined anymore, because once we start to let the energy of those feelings move through us, then something else is possible. Whereas if we're holding on to them, it's like water. If it's stuck, it's not very healthy water. It starts to smell, it starts to be full of stuff. But when we let those emotions that are like water flow through us, whether that's through movement of the body, as in movement medicine, or through expressing those feelings with other people around us, expressing how terrified we are, how much grief we feel about the loss of so many species. When we allow that, the energy can move and gets transformed into what it really is, which is love, right at the heart of all of these emotions. We wouldn't feel fear, we wouldn't feel grief if we didn't love the world so much. And then when we set those emotions free, then we have energy available again to take another step, whatever our step is in our current context. It doesn't always have to be this big step out there. It can be something very small that we change here in our way of engaging, for example, in what we pay attention to, in how we relate to our neighbor, or how we bring up our children, or what food we choose to make for ourselves, or all those kind of small things are equally important. Yeah, so I feel that there's something about that body of work and the dynamic of that active hope spiral that Joanna Macy talks about, that is very resonant with some of the ways we work in movement medicine, and also some of the ways that we work with the nervous system and with somatics. It's about completing or allowing a cycle to complete itself, a natural cycle of our being, of our nervous system, of our body to complete, rather than to interrupt it and kind of put it aside.
Yeah, which is from a lot of disease, actually, personal and collective. It stems out of that, from not looking, repressing, not engaging, not allowing, not including. And I love the hearing you, and I was really touched by your words, and what a beautiful tribute also to the work of Joanna Macy, who is such an incredible, extraordinary elder, who is leaving a potent, gracious legacy. So thank you for sharing a little bit about these threads, so it can be clear also for those who are listening. And
you mentioned the poetry, I just remembered, and I guess that what I just want to say about the poetry is that for me, the poetry is a bit like dancing. It's a way to hold and engage with some really big issues in a way that's not overwhelming. Like somehow the dance, when we're moving, when we're in our bodies, and also the poetry, a poem, can touch some really big questions without needing to answer them, without needing to resolve them, but simply to be with, to move with, to look at from a slightly different angle. It's kind of, for me, it's like a way of being with the mystery of life. You know, there isn't a question and an answer. It's kind of, there's a question and then there's like an opening onto a bigger landscape. And in the dance, that also happens for me a lot of the time, that when we're in a deep dance, we've come maybe with an intention, we've come with a question or a challenge or something we're really grappling with. And sometimes, yes, it leads to, okay, we're dancing with it, and then there's an insight. But more often than not, it's much more nuanced, much more complex, that we dance with something and we realize we're not needing the answer per se in this kind of clear-cut format that we're so used to with our head, but the answers come from the process of being engaged with it, and it's taking us to a new iteration of that question, or a new way of engaging with the question. And that in itself leads us on, and that in itself is helpful. But it's not something that we can resolve with our mind. And for me, that's the beauty of having the poetry, is for me so much of a way of inquiring that doesn't need an answer, and that also takes us into the feeling. When we read a poem, it's kind of, it can touch us in a way that maybe a novel or a film or a story doesn't, because it's so potent, so concentrated. It's almost like an image of a point in time that really captures a lot of different threads. So for me, it's medicine. It really is a very potent way also to open up conversations. So during the pandemic, at some point, I set up this group because I realized, for me, poetry is so important. And a small group of people kept meeting around once a month, and everyone brought a poem that had spoken to them. What I realized, which I couldn't have predicted, was that through engaging with the poetry, what happened was we created this beautiful space of intimacy and sharing between us that went far beyond any specific poem. But the poems were like little doors that allowed us to talk about things that maybe, if I'd said, right, today we're going to talk about this issue or this question, we wouldn't have found our way there. But because the poems kind of led us there, we were able to touch on big questions, on big feelings, on our experience of life in a way that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And these beautiful conversations emerged through this poetic doorway.
Yeah, I appreciate often in you this capacity to articulate in such a clear way. And it was you mentioned this expression, I think you said, opening doors through the poetry. And despite I know you, I can say quite well, but today, because I asked you questions and we are on this format online and we want to share with people, it's like you opened another door for me, another glimpse into your medicine that came through also from this capacity to use words and describe different kind of states and landscapes. And so, I really want to appreciate this journey that we've taken.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing what one discovers when one just talks. If I sit here and I wouldn't know what to say, but then when there's someone else, and once you get going, somehow, the waters flow.
And so before I ask another couple of things about your work and some practical things about, where people can find you and what is it that you're offering, is there anything, because there is so much room for this conversation, but is there anything maybe that I forgot to ask you, or anything that you would like to add that you feel it's important in this moment for you?
Yeah, at the moment I can't think of anything. We've covered so much territory and touched on so many different things that right now in this moment there isn't anything I can think of that. Yeah.
Okay, so then, can you share a little bit more about what's coming next
Sure.
for you, and how are you working with people, and how people can reach out in case they want to also ask questions or inquiry about, working with you.
Thank you. Yeah. So all my work is under the name of Being of the Earth, which was a name that came unexpectedly a few years ago. And for me, that's both being as in to be of the earth. What does that mean about our relationship to the earth? But also to be a being of the earth, to belong in that way. And yeah, at the moment, I'm just about to start another round of a course or program I call Becoming Kin. That starts next week. It's a 6-week program. And that is really very much about all the things that we talked about today. This conversation and connection between inner nature, the inner landscape in our bodies, and the outer landscape where we live. Whatever place we live in, there is nature, right? I mean, there are trees, there are insects, there are other beings. Even if we live in the city, there are so many expressions. There's nothing that's not nature, really. And wherever we are, we can find our specific relationship to the elements, for example, or to the beings that also live in that place. So this is really a journey that takes us deeper into the inner landscape and deeper into the outer landscape where we are, to find the medicine, the resources, the inspiration, the next steps that we might be longing for, both in terms of our own personal journey. So maybe where we're at in our lives, maybe we have big questions, or maybe we're stuck on something. Maybe we're in a transition with work or with relationships, or like we're stuck with some pattern that we kind of grappling with and we're not quite sure where to go with it. Could be that, or because, as I said, those two are never separate. The awareness of all that's happening in the world and how that impacts us. It impacts us with all these big emotions that I described earlier, but it also impacts us in the sense of, we don't quite know how to be anymore with this world that's changing so rapidly and dramatically, where we see on a daily basis these big things that we know are telling us there's more ahead in terms of climate, in terms of the changes to the natural world, in terms of the many issues that we're grappling with around justice and living together peacefully. So this journey is really about both. It's not that we just navel gaze and we go like, oh, in my own life I'm doing this thing and I want some help with it. And it's also not out there now, let's all just focus on fixing things. It's really about this recognition that the two are connected, the inner landscape, the outer landscape, the things that we feel here, the things that we're struggling with here, the things that are going on in the world, and to recognize that in the conversation between the inner and the outer, there can be resource, there can be insight, there can be new perspectives that emerge. So the course happens online in weekly meetings with the other travelers on the journey. And then in between our sessions, there are what I call home play invitations. So it's not homework, because it's really, more playful or less kind of pressured. There are practices, there are inquiries, there are invitations that people can do at home in between the sessions. And then there's some additional reading and viewing that's optional for those people who want to go a bit deeper. I know not everyone likes to read lots of things, also depending on your home language. That might not be something that you want to engage with, but that's available as additional resources. And then there's a space for people to connect with the other companions on the journey, to share, to learn from each other, to ask questions, to exchange experiences. And so we go on this journey together. We look at different aspects of belonging, of kinship with the more than human world, kinship with ourselves, with our own who are we and who are we in this body, kinship with each other, as we spoke about earlier, it's so important to have good company with all these inquiries and to look to each other for learning, for new perspectives, for this co-regulation of our nervous systems. And 6 weeks starting next Tuesday evenings, European UK time. This is the third time I'm running this, and it's very interesting to hear from the people who've done it a few times. There's two people who are doing it for the third time, because they found, each time it's different, because each time we're different, each time the surroundings that we step out into are different. The learning never stops. And we use very simple practices that are accessible to anyone, really. You don't need to have any previous experience of movement or engaging with the body. You don't need to have anything special set up in your life. All that you need is the internet connection and some time each week to step out where you live and to make some time for practice. And it's a beautiful journey. I really love this program, because so much magic happens for people. And I don't mean magic in this woo-woo way. I just mean when we pay attention to ourselves, when we pay attention to what's around us, when we slow down, when we really look again at things that we've just taken for granted, there's so much that happens on so many levels, on the level of how we feel, but also on the level of creativity and insight. Which actually is interesting that we've come to this place, and I'm saying when we really see, because what I remember about where we started the conversation at this workshop that we were both at, I think when we were in this little group doing whatever task we were doing with drawing, the picture that I drew, which I still probably have a photo of somewhere, was about we look and we really see each other. So it's interesting that our arc of this conversation is taking us there, because it was something about really paying attention differently and really seeing each other, the world, ourselves with new, loving, compassionate, open eyes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's one thing that's coming up, and there are other things. I don't know if you want me to talk about.
I was curious also, because I know that this is the third time you run this, and there are these people who are attending it for the third time, and I was curious if there is anything that comes to your mind in terms of aha moments of the previous participants that it would be okay, obviously, to share without breaking any confidentiality, or any insights or things that people learned that come to your mind in this moment.
I can give some examples. So it can be as simple as one of the participants had this longing for more aliveness, this longing for more energy in her day-to-day. And at one point, I invited people to get up early and go out before sunrise. Just once, just to experience it. And I already expected that some people would go like, oh, it's hard to get up early when you don't have to, and to go outside, depending on the season, can also be challenging. And this participant, I could see, was also, she shared with me afterwards that she was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure I can manage this. But she did. And it had such a powerful impact on her to see the sunrise, to make that connection with the light, to know that she had done this, that she had the capacity to do this, to step out because it was important, because it mattered, to make the connection with the light. That after that, I don't know if she's still doing it, but after that, for many weeks, she made a point of getting up and getting out early to greet the sun. And she carried with her that sensation of, there's this light that I can connect to. This might sound a bit esoteric, but it really on a physical level. There is some light available, there's this energy available that's in me, that's not just in the sky or out there, and I have the power to step out. It's not just a metaphor, but so many of us, it's what I talked about with the water earlier, to realize that you're capable of more than you thought you were capable of can be a powerful experience of growth, and a powerful way to try something new, right? So this is like a small example of something that, I don't want to talk about some of the impacts on people's lives in a bigger way, because I feel that's confidentiality, that's not mine to share. But some small things that shift how we see ourselves, how we experience ourselves, can be really powerful. And then another participant, I remember, he was sharing about his relationship with the crows that live where he is. He'd never really noticed them before, because crows, they're not like big fancy birds. And then as we were going through some of the practices, he developed this relationship with the crows, and since then he hasn't been able to stop seeing them, and it's created a new relational dimension in his life on a day-to-day basis, where he feels they are communicating with him in some way, and he can communicate with them, and there's a kinship there that's grown in a place that he's not living in a in a jungle or in surrounded by nature. He's living in a town or in a city, and here are these birds that he's developed this relationship with, and that are offering him insight, that are offering him a possibility of relationship in a way that was not there before.
Yeah, wow, it's really making me think about the poignancy of this example and the importance actually of this work that you're offering, even more so, if I can say that, if that's correct in English, for people who are not living in connection to the land, because the majority of the people were living maybe in a flat or in a town and spending a lot of time in the car, and maybe there aren't many parks around. So despite this is so normalized, because we live in a culture and in a industrial society where this became the norm, but the loss, the magnitude of the loss, it's so potent that to be able to reclaim that and integrate, as you said at the very beginning, for the healing of relationship with self, and for healing of the relationship with the animal and the web of life, it's really, really important. In fact, I think that nowadays there is quite a common agreement in many therapeutic fields, and perhaps also in neuroscience, or at least in those fields that are not really individualistic, but that are looking more at systems, that most of the neuroses that we suffer from in our world, actually they come because they are born out of the severance. Do you say like that in English?
Yeah, the disconnect.
That connection, because of that disconnection, that in a way or even another one we all suffer from. So because that became the norm, then you spoke so much about practice at the beginning. We need practices also to go back to that and to pay attention, because we are so asleep towards the possibility of relating to our kins, that unless we pay attention and we make space and are willing to do so, is going to be challenging for a lot of us.
Yeah, and the beauty is also that even if we're not living somewhere where we have lots of access to, a natural environment, I mean, everything is natural, but a natural environment in the way that we have trees and other animals and water or whatever, even if we don't have that, the beauty of this work is that it's right here in our own bodies, right? The earth is right here in our own body. We're made of earth. The light of the sun, the fire of the sun comes into our bodies through the food that we eat, because the plants that we eat have absorbed that sunshine. So we turn that into energy. The waters are right there in our tears, in our blood, in our lymph, in all the bodily fluids. The air is there constantly with the breath. And of course, we are ourselves in our body, as we learn through all this research on the gut and on the bacteria that live on the skin. We are a whole microcosm of life. So there's nature right here in our own being, even if we don't have the opportunity to step outside a lot. There are plants in our houses that are also beings. They're not, they're also alive. They're also just as worthy of our communication as a tree in a forest. So I mean, it's inescapable. The kind of nature that we're talking about here is inner nature and outer nature, and it's everywhere. We're not separate from it. That is the whole problem, that we think that we're only going out into nature rather than we're in nature all the time. Our own body has that intelligence that also lives in a tree or in a rock or in the sea or in the sky, in the clouds. It's the same. We're not separate.
So on that line, time actually, we could go on and on and on. Last thing I want to ask you is, you shared about becoming kin, and are you also offering at the moment individual work, or are you focusing more on the group work?
No, I offer both. So I offer the group programs like Becoming Kin, and then I work one-on-one with people in a somatic coaching, therapeutic accompaniment kind of way. So some of the people I work with have got quite specific intentions for this work or a specific thing they want to work on. And then other people, I guess I would describe it as I said, more therapeutic accompaniment. They don't come with a specific question, but they feel, okay, right now in my life, I need a little bit more support, a little bit more holding. I need someone to help me look at what's happening, even if I'm not quite clear about what specifically it is. But, we can all do with a little bit more support. And quite often it's hard to find that, also to find support in the way we have friends, perhaps, but our friends are our friends. Sometimes it can be a bit messy to try and use them as as our support system in that way at the same time. And they're also not neutral, let's say. They've got their own things going on that feed into how they respond to you. So it can be very, very helpful. And you and me know that, to have other people to hold space for us, to ask us questions, to reframe our perspectives, and to see what emerges when we offer ourselves that time, that space to slow down, to inquire. And as we spoke about earlier, I work somatically, so we work a lot with tracking what's happening in the body and really using the wisdom, the intelligence of the body to support us, to ground, to resource, to work with some of the challenges or questions that are coming up, some of the stories that are keeping us stuck in a particular pattern, and to tap into our own wisdom to transform those. Not to think that, I don't have your answer, but I can help guide you to find your answer, right? So it's not fixing anything. It's about understanding better who we are and how we might develop our capacity to be with life as it keeps coming at us and as it keeps moving us up and down in all these loops and roller coaster rides. So that's how I work with people one-on-one, and people are welcome to get in touch. I like to work with people for a minimum of 3 months rather than just one-off sessions, but I am happy for people to contact me and to hop on a call and see if this would be a good fit for them. And then twice a week, we talked about practice earlier, twice a week I still offer an online dance space that's very simple. You turn up, there's music, there's no facilitation, but there is a lovely community of people who show up every week and have done so for for more than 3 years now. And that's just a way to support people in their practice of movement. it can be hard to get up in the morning and just do it by yourself, but it's much easier to have the momentum of a regular slot, to know this is the time it starts, this is the time it finishes. All I have to do is get out of bed, get myself into a space in my own living room or in my own bedroom where I can move, and then there's music and there's company, and I'm just going to see what happens when I move my body. So it's very simple, 45 minutes twice a week. And everyone's welcome. There's no prerequisite. There's nothing that you need to know before. You just turn up and you move. And if your movement is lying on the floor or using a chair to support yourself, that's just as valuable as what we think of as dance. Your dance doesn't have to look anything like a dance. It's your own expression of how you are in the moment. And yeah, it's a very gentle space. It's Wednesday mornings at 7 a.m. UK, 8 a.m. European time at the moment, and Fridays at 8 a.m. UK, 9 a.m. European time. You'd have to, if you're somewhere else, can't keep all the time zones in my head, but I'm sure you can find out what time that is for you. I mean, it's the middle of the night in the US, unfortunately, although we have a very dedicated dancer from the US who comes in the middle of his night. And yeah, you'll find your own time zone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Petra. I look forward for sharing this conversation, and I hope other people will find it helpful, and I hope people will get in touch with you and learn more about you and from you. So
thank you, Laura. Really, what a wonderful opportunity, and to do this with you. So it's that thing, very helpful to have someone that you trust and that you feel safe with, to be able to express and to wander and meander through all these different themes and subjects.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.